Danilo by Korte. Prologue. The two young Marine MPs guarding the front gate of the Subic Bay Navy Base stand at parade rest, hair buzzed short, backs rigid, and straight eyes facing forward. The brass on their heavily polished belt buckles gleams in the bright Philippine sunlight. Below my feet as I stand on the Shit River Bridge, the dingy, weak tea-colored water fouls the air from Olongapo to Subic Bay. 3 blue nape parrots come to rest on the railing between where I stand in the middle of the bridge and the 2 stiff jarheads at the gate, while I continue to scan left and right, anxiously watching for any movement. The brightly colored parrots relax for only a couple of seconds before they lift off again, flushed by 2 sailors just freed from their ship for shore leave. They hurry across the bridge toward me. The sailors are both dressed in bright white Navy uniforms. The one closer to me, a thin, pimply-faced kid, probably only 19 years old, displays 2 black slashes across his left shoulder, informing the world that he is one of the lowest-ranking fighting men in the U.S. Navy. His buddy, walking beside him in black spit-shine shoes, round sailor hat tipped far back on his head, and white bell-bottomed pants swishing together as he hustles along, sports 3 black slashes. I can hear their conversation as they approach me. "Yes, how many times do I need to explain this stuff to you, newbie?" the older sailor complains. "I still don't believe it. You're telling me that all these beautiful girls just line up in front of me, and then I point to the one I want? Right. She hangs out, parties with me, and then I pay the guy at the door, and she can leave with me? That's what I said. And she goes with me just like that? This kid and all the others like him are the reason I'm stuck here on this fucking bridge right now. They caused this." I fight the urge to reach out, wrap my hands around the pimply kid's neck, press my thumbs into the front of his throat, and shake the hell out of him. I bite my tongue instead. As they step closer to me, I can see that they are paying more attention to their conversation than to where they are going. I hold my ground. "Sorry, sir," the older sailor apologizes as he finally looks up and sees me. "Sorry, sir," the younger sailor echoes. They walk around me as I shift the heavy white bank bag from my right hand over to my left, surprised at how much 1,000,000 pesos actually weigh. Now what? I close my eyes for a second so I can see her face in my mind. What if I never get to see her again? I visualize her sitting at the kitchen table, smiling, safe and sound, back on the farm in Nebraska. The long, green, fertile rows of corn stand high, heavy, and ready to be picked. The flies buzz lazily around the cows as they graze contently out in the pasture behind the old barn. I smile as I think of her sitting there, wearing the pretty blue sundress that she knows I like, the one she only wears around the farm when it's just the 2 of us because she thinks it shows just a little too much cleavage. Her dark brown hair touches the smooth tanned skin on her shoulders, which connect perfectly to the soft curve of her neck. She smiles back, and I think, how lucky I am to have a woman like that. I stand there, looking down into the nasty, stinky water of the Shit River. 2 little boys wearing their snorkels and masks wave to me as they tread water, trying to get my attention. I dig through my pockets, throw them a few shiny pesos, and watch them dive for the money. I look up, close my eyes tightly, and take a deep breath. God, please. Chapter 1. "How much to go to the Brown Fox Club?" a man's voice asked. "What?" I mumbled, opening my eyes slowly to the bright sunlight sneaking through the fronds of the big coconut tree under which I was parked. "The what?" I said again, trying to clear my head. "The Brown Fox," he snapped. 10 pesos, I told him, just to see if he would go for it. "What? Do I look like a fucking newbie to you?" I'll give you 4. Otherwise, I'm taking the other one. 4 was really the going rate. This guy must be stationed here, I thought. Okay, no problem. Get in, I said. All right, let's go then. No bullshit either, or I'll wring your scrawny little fucking neck. You understand? I want to go where I can see some titties, and I don't have to smell this damn river for a while. The big jarhead looked like a brawler, and his ears were slightly cauliflowered. He had a recent black eye and a tattoo of a Marine Corps bulldog on his left forearm. The heavy muscles in his arms and shoulders flexed as he settled into the seat of my trike, a small motorcycle equipped with a sidecar. Immediately I noticed his bulging wallet peeking out of his back pants pocket. I lived with my mother and sister in the city of Subic Bay on the Philippine Islands, about a half a mile from the sprawling U.S. Navy base and just across the bridge that spans the Olongapo River. The city of Subic Bay in 1978 was like one of those gold rush boomtowns in an old American Western, except the only gold came in the form of the U.S. government paychecks given to the Marines and sailors who lived on the base. Subic was full of noisy bars, strip clubs, dark alleys, drunken men, and those of us who lived off the U.S. government money. People were hungry and kept their eyes open for opportunities, and one of the hungriest of them all was my Uncle Tony. Uncle Tony was big for a Filipino and had a large, ugly purple birthmark on his right cheek. It looked just like the state of Kentucky on the wall map in Sister Deborah's classroom. He also sweated more than most people. Maybe it was because of his size. The top of his big, bald head always seemed covered with small beads of perspiration. The back of his shirt and underarms were usually wet, too. When I was very little, I joked with my mom that Uncle Tony smelled like the shit river. He stood across the room at the time and luckily didn't hear me. She looked over at him, waited till he had left the room, and then slapped me. "Don't ever say again," she scolded me. The only thing Uncle Tony feared more than my mother was the water. Living on an island, you'd think he would have learned how to swim, but for some reason he never did. He swore nothing but pure Filipino blood coursed through his veins, even though most people would guess by his size that this was untrue. The rumor in Subic was that his father had been a visiting Nazi general during World War II. Uncle Tony was old now. His 33rd birthday was coming up next month. My mother was a year older than Uncle Tony. She was very pretty and petite. Her hair hung almost down to her waist. Uncle Mike said she looked like a Filipino movie star. She had helped look after Uncle Tony ever since they grew up together in an orphanage outside of Manila. My mother said that when they were kids, he had always been overweight, and with his excessive sweating and the big purple birthmark on his face, the older boys would tease and pick on him relentlessly. The abuse made him tough and mean as hell. Eventually, when his body grew large enough to match the meanness within him, he took revenge on each of the boys who had caused him pain. No one had ever messed with him again after that. He and my mother were not related by blood, but looked after each other like family. When Mom became pregnant with my sister Rose just before she turned 17, the nuns had told her that she would be moved from the orphanage to a shelter for unwed mothers. She and Uncle Tony did not want to be separated, so they escaped and moved to Subic. They lived together for a while as a family until Mom became pregnant again, this time with me. That was more than 16 years ago. But since Uncle Tony was not my father, nor my older sisters, problems arose. No one would ever explain exactly what happened, but I guess there was a fight and he moved out. Apparently, my dad lived with my mom for a short while and then left. When Uncle Tony found out my mother was alone again, he tried to get back into her life, but she told him she did not love him in that way. Still, he stayed close to my mom and helped her whenever he could. and I ended up calling him Uncle. I looked over at the big Marine now sitting in my sidecar as we pulled away from the curb. I asked, "Where are you from, Sergeant?" I usually made small talk with the guys and asked them where they were from, what squadron they were in, and stuff like that. It helped when it came time for them to pay me. "Texas," he replied, looking surprised, as if he had just seen me for the first time. "Hey, kid, are you a Filipino?" The Marine was confused, like most people who met me for the first time. My blonde hair, wide shoulders, and extra height made me stick out from the other Subic kids. They said I had bigger bones. The stark contrast of my blue eyes and dark skin instantly threw people off. My best friend, Max, lived around the corner from me. We loved to read the Marvel comic books together. He would tease me sometimes and call me Thor. Max was short, even for a Filipino, but a tough kid. "My dad was a Marine fighter pilot," I said proudly. "He flies jets, A6s. "Is he stationed here?" the Marine asked. "I don't know where he is. I've never met him," I said indifferently. "Oh," the Marine replied quietly, sitting in awkward silence for a few seconds before he piped up in a loud voice. "My old man left me and my mama when I was just 9 years old. The only thing I remember about that drunken son of a bitch was how frickin' hard he could hit. I wish would have never met that fucking bastard." I looked at him and didn't know what to say. I downshifted, took a hard right, hit my brakes, and then stopped quickly in order to allow an old woman and a little boy to cross the street in front of me. We sat there on the paved main drag. The smaller side streets were full and dusty. A long line of jeeps, trikes, bikes, and little rusty cars stretched out on either side as far as I could see. Small, noisy, and smoky, two-stroke engines revved and rattled. The clashing sounds of both country and rock music spilled out from the many different bars that lined the streets, mixing with the thousands of voices of the men and women of Subic. Vendors selling sunglasses and stupid things like monkeys carved from coconuts hollered above the racket. A Marine CH-46 helicopter approached the base airfield, and somehow, with all that noise, a lone crowing rooster made itself heard above it all. Looking down at the Marine sitting there in my sidecar, dressed in his sharp, ironed and starched tan and green uniform, made me think of my father. Mom had one faded and fuzzy picture of him that she had given me. The words July 3, 1963 were written on the back. I liked to look at myself closely in the mirror as I held the photo up so I could compare the two of us. The picture did not reveal much about my father since it was in such bad shape, but one of the things I could clearly make out was the nose art on the side of his jet. A small man with a big red cowboy hat holding a rifle. I often wondered where my dad was and what he was like, and why that little man with the big cowboy hat was painted on the side of his jet. It must have meant something to him. "Your mom's a round eye?" the Marine asked as I popped the clutch and shifted into second gear. I know the guy was trying to be friendly, but he was pissing me off. "She's Filipino, sir," I answered. "Her eyes are just as round as yours," I wanted to say. "Don't call me sir. I'm an enlisted man. I work for a living," he said. "What about the lingo?" "My mom pays for Catholic school, and she makes sure she gets her money's worth," I explained. My mom worked in the Blackbird Club. That's where she met my father, who was a Marine fighter pilot and captain. Mom always carried a small razor-sharp butterfly knife with her and had been known to use it. And if that wasn't enough, she could always send for my Uncle Tony. The big Marine in my sidecar finally stopped asking me questions. I buzzed through the tight streets of Subic, dodging and weaving through the traffic and people. Everyone moved pretty much in any direction they wanted and when they felt like it. The U.S. military maintained a Navy base in Subic since 1898, when they took control of the Philippines after defeating Spain in the Spanish-American War. It was the biggest overseas naval base the U.S. ever had. The Vietnam War had ended almost 5 years earlier, but Subic was still full of thousands of tough Marines and sailors stationed there with not much else to do but get into trouble. 24 hours a day, the streets ran full of guys out on shore leave, walking up and down the streets, checking out the clubs, drinking, fighting, and living it up. "Hey, you little shit! Let me off here," the Marine sergeant commanded. I hit my brakes hard and pulled over to the curb. "Here's a couple of extra pesos. Come back at midnight and I'll pay the same for the ride back to base. You gonna be here or not?" "No problem," I lied. He probably won't have any money left by then. I shoved the extra pesos into my pocket. Music from the Brown Fox poured out into the street as one of the shotgun-toting doormen ushered the big Marine sergeant inside. I was pretty sure that the Marine I had just dropped off was a grunt. Grunts were the Marines brought to Subic for jungle training. Most of them were 18 to 22 years old. This guy looked a few years older than that, though. I started to pull away from the curb of the Brown Fox Club when two girls stepped out onto the sidewalk. "Boy, we need a ride back to the Blackbird Club. Our shift starts in 20 minutes. They both wore short skirts and looked about my age. One was especially attractive, with her long legs and big brown eyes. They were definitely in a good mood and held on to each other in order to steady themselves, probably because they had been drinking or smoking something. The really pretty one dropped her purse next to me and slowly bent over to pick it up. She leaned in close against me to help steady herself. The warmth of her body instantly triggered a chemical reaction in mine. "I sit behind," the girl told her friend in English, pointing to the back of my seat. "Why you?" "I sit behind. Get in," the pretty one commanded. The other girl reluctantly sat in the sidecar, and the one with the long legs smiled as she caught me staring at her. I quickly lowered my eyes. She slipped in behind me and wrapped her arms tightly around my waist, giggling and pressing herself against me as I popped the clutch. I could feel the hardness of each of her nipples through our cotton shirts as I shifted gears. "I like blondes," she laughed as she turned toward her friend in the sidecar, her hands clasped together and lightly resting just above my lap. Should I say something to her? Maybe I should ask if I can buy her a Coke or something after she's done working. I kept running scenarios in my head of how to approach her. Maybe if I don't say anything, she would pursue me. Maybe lying in bed tonight, she'll knock at my bedroom door. I imagined the whole scenario of what she might say. "Oh, Danilo, I've been thinking about you all day. I hope you don't mind. I asked around and found out where you lived. Can I come in?" She stands in the doorway with the hall light behind her as she reaches behind her back and unzips her dress. She lets it fall to the floor, gathering around her ankles. She then crosses the room slowly over to the side of my bed. I look up at her as she stands over me. Her breasts are small and perfect, with dark brown nipples standing erect. She pulls back the covers. "Wow, looks as if you happy to see me." She slides in next to me and reaches down between my legs and, "Blackbird! Blackbird!" the girl in the sidecar yelled. I roughly pulled up to the curb next to the Blackbird Club, and the girl with the long legs let go of my waist and hopped off the back of my trike. She stood in front of me, her eyes lowered towards my crotch. As she handed me her pesos, she slowly raised her eyes to meet mine and looked down at my crotch again and began to giggle. "Oh, shit," I thought as I tried to cover myself with my hands. The girls both giggled as they turned and stumbled into the club. I just sat there like a dipshit with my hands in my lap. Oh, Christ, I'm such a loser. Why would any girl ever want to be with me? I spent most of what was left of the night shuttling other drunks around town, and then later finally pulled back up to the Blackbird Club to take a short break. Uncle Tony and a few of his men were standing out front. I noticed earlier that Uncle Tony had stared at the big Marine as we had driven past, the one who had kept asking me all the questions. I could tell Uncle Tony really didn't like him for some reason. I wasn't surprised. That was usually the case when it came to him and the Americans, especially the Marines. The big Marine sergeant I picked up earlier asked me to come back and get him at midnight. That sucker's going to be sitting there a long time if he thinks I'm going all the way back there for him, I said as I climbed off my trike. The expression that appeared on Uncle Tony's face confused me. He looked hurt, angry, and excited all at the same time. He motioned me to step closer and seemed to look right through me as he spoke, not really so much talking to me, but to himself. Good, he said in a dark and cold voice that made me step back from him. I've crossed paths with that Kano son of a bitch before, Danilo. It's time that you see what a real man does to his enemies. Bring him to me. Kano is what the Filipinos call the Americans, short for Americano. That grunt bastard is going to be floating face down in Shit River tonight. The Marines and the sailors called the water that ran under the big bridge outside the front gate of the base the Shit River. The Navy engineers had built the bridge wide and paved it with cement. They had added high chain-link sides to the bridge in hopes of discouraging the military guys from throwing pesos into the water. The guys liked to see the poor little kids dive into the shallow, slow-moving, shitty water. He then stuck out his hand. What do you have for me, Blondie? I emptied my pockets and handed him most of the cash I had collected from an evening of driving the trike. I had stashed several American dollars in my shoe. He gave me a sly, disbelieving smile and grabbed a handful of hair on the back of my head and shook me angrily. This is it? What the hell you been doing all night? It must be that lazy American blood in you. Ow, ow, stop. Uncle Tony, stop. They ripped me off. They didn't pay me. Please. I cried as I finally gave up and decided to tell him about the money in my shoe. But for a brief second, just before I did, he looked at me just as he used to when I was a little kid. He slowly let go of me and raised his big hand. I flinched. He smiled, lowered his hand, and gently stroked the top of my head as if I were a stray mutt he had just found running in the street. Get back out there and bring that grunt to me. I might forgive you for not pulling your weight around here tonight. You understand? Okay. What? Yes, Uncle Tony, I understand. Danilo, don't fuck this up. He turned and walked back into the Blackbird Club. Raoul, one of Uncle Tony's men, came over to me after Tony had gone inside. Sergeant Stahle, huh? What? I replied. Sergeant Stahle. Big son of a bitch, right? Bulldog tattoo? Yeah, that sounds like him, I said. Well, my young friend, tonight you're finally going to get your hands dirty, Raoul said with a chuckle. Staley's been spending time with Anna over at the Brown Fox. You mean Uncle Tony's Anna? I asked. Yeah, said Raoul. He had me following her all week to see if she was messing around on him with that jarhead. I gave him the bad news last night. I was worried he was going to kill me when I told him. Oh, shit, I cussed. Big Tony is going to make that Kano feel pain. I've never seen him so mad before. I started to panic. I didn't want to be involved in a mugging, and I sure as hell didn't want to be in any murder. Do you think he might not kill him? I asked. Oh, he's going to kill him all right, but first he's going to make him hurt, he said matter-of-factly as he put his hand on top of my head, messed up my hair, and then walked away. For some reason, they always seemed to want to touch my blonde hair. My uncle had taught me some very clever but crooked ways to make money, but because of my mother, he'd never included me in anything that would physically hurt anyone. Not too badly, anyway, until now. Uncle Tony was a powerful man, and when I was younger, I had made the mistake of looking up to him and thinking I wanted to be like him. He had been there for my mother, sister, and me many times in the past when we had needed him. More than once we didn't have enough money for the rent as my mother cried and worried we would have to live on the street. Uncle Tony would come through for us. I just didn't realize where he got the money to give our landlord. Danilo, don't waste all the time reading that crap they give you in school. You will come work for me and drive one of my trikes. You can make big money if you know what to look for, he said to me almost a year ago. So, of course, I did, but my mom also made sure I still went to school. A full-time job with Uncle Tony at night and classes during the day kept me very busy, mostly out of trouble. Shortly after I had first started working for him, I had finished my shift late one night and handed all my fare money over to him. That evening, he seemed preoccupied and didn't even look at the cash I had given him. He stared distantly and said, "Go home now, Danilo. I have some business I need to take care of." That was the first and last order of his that I did not follow. Instead, I hid behind a big trash can and watched as he and several of his men walked back into the dark alley on the side of the Brown Fox Club. Tony and his men crowded around a very small, thin local man who ran one of the t-shirt shops just outside the gate of the base. Terrified and surrounded, the man sat cross-legged in a puddle in the alley, his hands in his lap. I could hear the little man whine and cry as he shook his head side to side. "No, no." Uncle Tony leaned in close to the small man and said something that I could not hear, and I'll never forget the look of horror that washed over the man's face. Uncle Tony then pointed. "Give me those." One of Uncle Tony's men then tossed him a big pair of pliers. Two men held the man down while another pulled the man's hand out where Uncle Tony could grab hold of it. "This man made promises to me that he did not keep," he declared loudly so they all could hear. "Did you think I was too weak?" he said as he kicked the man in the ribs. "Did you think that you could just disrespect me and I wouldn't do anything? Do you still think that? Do you?" No, please, I'm sorry. I do respect you," the man cried. "It's too late for you now, you worthless hippon. Shut him up," Uncle Tony commanded. One of his men removed the man's shoe, pulled the sock off his foot, and shoved it forcefully into the little man's mouth. The vendor screamed in agony as Uncle Tony took the pliers and slowly squeezed the end of each of the little man's fingers until they were flat. I was close enough that I could hear the bones crunch. Tony then reached down and wrapped his right hand around the small man's neck and lifted him up off the ground. The man kicked his legs and fought to free himself as Tony's hand clenched tighter and tighter around his neck. His face turned red and purple, his eyes bulged out, and then he stopped moving. Uncle Tony had used only one hand. I crouched lower as I watched Uncle Tony unzip his trousers, step closer, and then urinate on the small man. I froze in my hiding place behind the trash can until they had left. After I knew I was all alone, I slowly walked to where the little man was lying on his back with his arms stretched out like Jesus on the cross. I had never seen a dead person before. His eyes were wide open and bloodshot. His tongue was blue and hung out of his mouth. Part of the tongue was loose and bleeding from where he must have bitten down as he was being strangled. The end of each finger had been flattened into a piece of bloody meat and shredded bone. I gagged. The acidy contents of my stomach spewed from my mouth. I turned and ran from the alley. I can't believe he did that. I can't believe he did that. Now I understood who Uncle Tony really was and where our rent money had come from. After that night, almost every time he came close to me, my stomach would ache, and as if I stayed around him for too long, I would start to feel nauseous, and as if I was going to throw up. This didn't help me with Uncle Tony, and I think the fact that I was starting to look more like my Kano father with my blue eyes and blonde hair created too much of a reminder to him that my mother did not love him in that way. So I now had no doubt of exactly what he was about to do to the Marine. I had given a ride to earlier in the evening. Delivering the jarhead to Uncle Tony would prove I was loyal and graduate me up to his next level. I would be baptized in blood, and once that happened, there would be no turning back for me. I stood there leaning against the wall. The bass from the loud music inside the bar vibrated all the way through the back of my skull. I bit my lower lip and then stomped my foot. "Shit!" I screamed. I walked over and climbed back onto my trike, knowing what needed to be done, but not sure how it would all turn out. My head throbbed as I drove through the throngs of people still on the streets. I could feel the contents of my stomach bubbling up again, just high enough in the back of my throat where I could faintly taste the bottle of Coke and plate of rice I had downed about half an hour earlier. I made my way back across town and pulled up in front of the Brown Fox again. The big Marine gave me a faint look of recognition, staggered to my trike, and fell in. "Hey, little buddy," he said, putting his heavy arm across my back. He smelled as if he had drunk half a Subic. I kick-started the trike and pulled away from the curb into traffic. He rode quietly in the sidecar for almost 5 minutes, with his eyes closed and his chin resting on his chest. I thought that he had passed out. Then, suddenly, he sat up and grabbed me by the back of my neck and shook me. "Guys like us don't need anyone else. Am I right?" he slurred. "Look at me. Hell, look at you. We're doing just fine without some bastard pushing us around. You don't need anyone kicking our asses trying to teach us what's right, what's wrong. Right? Right?" he yelled into my ear as he finally let loose on my neck. "You're damn right," he finished, answering his own question. "Wait a second. Stop," he ordered. When I came to a stop, the Marine leaned over, gagged, and then threw up all over the curb. He wiped his face with the side of his hand and settled back into the small trike seat. "If I ever see that son of a bitch again, I'm going to kick his ass," he mumbled. "You just watch me. They trained me good. He won't know what the hell hit him." I squeezed the black rubber grips of my handlebars until the tops of my knuckles turned white. It was over 80 degrees and humid, but I could not stop from shivering. Screech! The brakes on my trike squealed. My shirt was soaked under my arms, and it stuck to my back. "You watch where you're going, boy!" yelled a local Subic man leading a small monkey on a leash. The startled monkey jumped up onto the man's shoulder and hissed. I looked over again into the sidecar. The Marine sergeant had passed out, this time with his head back and his mouth wide open. "Don't do this. Just walk away," the voice in my head screamed. I sat still for a few more minutes as people crossed the intersection in front of me. I crawled off the trike, walked about 5 steps away from it, turned around, and stood there for a few minutes staring at my toes. Oh, God. Then I returned and climbed back up onto my seat again. I popped the clutch and slowly started driving toward the alley where Uncle Tony and his men were waiting. I kept glancing down at the sleeping grunt. He looked younger while he was asleep. There was still a small amount of puke on his chin and the front of his shirt. I almost got as far as the Shit River Bridge, but fearing what might happen if I didn't obey, I slowly motored towards the dark alley where Uncle Tony had instructed me to go. I could see several of his men lurking in the shadows as I came to a stop. I gunned the engine a couple of times as I waited. There at the end of the alley. "Just do it. Get it over with. They can see me now. Shit. I have to do it. I have no choice." The smell of rotten garbage and urine from the dark alley wafted through the air. Hot blood pounded in my ears, along with the rock music from one of the strip clubs somewhere on the street behind me. A large burning drop of sweat slid from my forehead into my right eye and blinded me until I wiped it away with the end of my shirt tail. I looked over at the sleeping jarhead again. He was sitting there fast asleep with a big grin on his face. He must have finally stopped thinking about his old man, I thought. Shit, I hissed. What the hell am I doing? I punched the gas tank in my trike with my right hand. I yelled into the dark alley. No, I can't. An angry Uncle Tony stepped out into the open, slowly pointed his finger at me and then at the ground next to him, signaling me to come to him as if I was his dog. I obediently drove forward a couple of feet, but something made me stop. Uncle Tony glared at me. His face turned red as he realized that I was not going to do what he wanted me to. I popped the clutch to turn the trike around. The trike lurched forward, chugged twice, and died. I frantically kicked the starter lever to no avail as several of Uncle Tony's men began to move toward me. My leg slipped from the kickstart, and the compression of the engine forced the lever to slam back into the shin of my right leg. Shit, I screamed as the pain shot up through my body. Realizing I was about to get away, Tony's men broke from a walk into a run towards me. The commotion must have stirred the sergeant from his drunken slumber. What the hell is going on? Sergeant Stahle asked, struggling to focus. With one last desperate kick, the finicky motor coughed, sputtered, and finally crawled back to life. I wanted to just back up and leave. I wanted to leave Tony and his men behind, but the trike didn't have reverse. Now what? There was only one option. I gunned the engine and drove straight through the group of oncoming men and Uncle Tony, hitting a trash can and scattering its contents across the alley as the men jumped out of the way. One of them held something shiny in his hand that gleamed in front of my headlight. Knife! The armed man swung at us and cut Sergeant Stahle in the shoulder as we tore past and into the safety of the larger and well-lit street at the end of the dark alley. God damn it, the sergeant cursed. Turn around! What? I screamed. They want to kill you. We'll see who kills who, he said as he grabbed my arm and squeezed it hard until I stopped the trike. The sergeant hopped out of the sidecar and headed back into the dark alley after Uncle Tony and his goons. He walked over to an old wooden chair that was propped up against the alley wall and stomped on it, busting it into pieces. He bent over, picked up what was left of the chair, and ripped off one of its legs, held it in his right hand, and slammed it against the wall to test its strength. Then the sergeant continued down the alley. In panic, I gunned the engine, sped almost a block away, stopped, and looked back over my shoulder. What do I do now? He's there because of me. I took him there. Then again, he's a dumbass that had to get out of the trike. Who the hell does he think he is anyways, freaking John Wayne? These guys all come here and act like they own the place. His dad hit him. So what? At least he knows who his dad is. I bet his family is back in Texas. They're rich as hell. Probably all kinds of oil money. Everybody in Texas has oil money. I argued with myself until I noticed 3 Marines in the middle of ordering something to eat at one of the little food stands across the street. I rushed over to them. A Marine is being attacked in the alley. He needs help, I yelled. The biggest one of the 3 looked around, seemed unable to decide what to do with his big sandwich he was holding. Finally, he took a huge bite, threw the rest of it on the ground, and then jumped into the sidecar. The small motorcycle engine strained with the extra weight. I barreled through the street as the other 2 ran behind us toward the dark, crowded alley. Sergeant Stahle had his back to me as we drove toward him. I could see someone lying on the ground through the beam of my headlight. The man who had cut him just a few minutes earlier was still trying to finish the job. The jarhead's going to get himself killed because of me. I aimed the headlight of the trike directly into his eyes, the eyes of the man with the knife. As he raised his free hand to block the glare, the big grunt grabbed the hand holding the shiny knife and buried the full 6-inch length of it under the mugger's chin. A gush of blood shot from the wound. The big Marine grunted as he pulled the knife left, right, and then straight up, lifting the now dead man off the ground, covering his arms in hot, wet, gooey blood. I frantically scanned the alley looking for Uncle Tony. I didn't see him. "You okay, Sergeant?" asked one of the Marines who had come to his rescue. "What?" Sergeant Stahle asked. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Yeah. Where'd you guys come from?" Sergeant Stahle asked the three Marines. "The kid," one of them said, pointing to me. "You boys better get the hell out of here so you don't get mixed up in this shit," Sergeant Stahle said to the other Marines. "You sure you're okay? Get the fuck out of here." "Hoorah!" the big one said as he ran out of the alley. "Boy, help me," Sergeant Stahle said as he staggered towards the trike. The combination of adrenaline, alcohol, and a knife wound made the sergeant shaky, heavy, and unsure of his step. I helped him back into the sidecar, drove him up to the front gate of the base, and several MPs helped me unload him. When they lifted him out, I noticed the sidecar was covered in blood, and his fat wallet, still full of cash, was sitting there, the edges of the green bills smeared red. "You okay, kid?" the Sergeant Stahle asked while he stood there bleeding. I looked up at him and then down again at the bloody wallet. "I'm fine," I said as he felt around his pocket. "You looking for this?" I asked as I reached over and picked up his wallet and handed it to him. He looked me in the eye. "Thanks, kid. I won't forget this." He shook my hand before falling into the waiting arms of the two large MPs. He lifted his head and looked back at me again for a few seconds before disappearing behind the gate, supported by an MP on each side of him. I turned the motor of my trike off and just sat there in the base parking lot. The corporal on guard eyeballed me as I began to talk to myself. What the hell did I just do? Now what? I threw up on the sidewalk. "Hey!" the corporal yelled. I jumped up on my trike and kicked the engine over until it started. I knew I was still in big trouble with Uncle Tony, and I needed an ally. The only person on the planet who seemed to have any control over Uncle Tony was my mother, so I decided to go find her. "What you do now? How you make money now?" she complained after I told her what had happened. "Mom, he was going to kill the guy." Okay, I talked to Uncle Tony for you. It'd be okay." "No, it won't be okay. He wanted to help me kill him. Don't you get it? All you think about is the goddamn money." "You okay? Go sleep. I take care of your uncle. He no hurt you," Mom said. "No worry." "Mom, you didn't see how mad he was," I said. "You go your room. Go!" I tried to relax, but instead of drifting off to sleep, I kept imagining Uncle Tony busting through my doorway or window and strangling me. Mom must have read my mind. She crawled next to me in bed and slept there in my room all night. I finally fell off to sleep with her on guard, comforted by her gentle voice repeating, "You good boy, Danilo, good boy. I talk Uncle Tony. You be okay. You be okay." It sounded as if she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. And that scared me. Chapter 2. I did not have school the next morning, so I decided that it was probably a mistake for me to sit at home, where Uncle Tony would easily be able to find me. I met up with my friend, Max, and we headed to town. Word was out that the two men lying in the alley were dead, and that Uncle Tony had been hurt very badly and then disappeared. No one knew what had happened or where he was. Max and I kept looking over our shoulders and kept our heads low as we sneaked around Subic. We made our way to the crowded white sand beach where we could relax, surrounded by all the American servicemen and their beautiful young Filipino companions. Navy jets from the base crisscrossed overhead, leaving miles of long white steam trails across the blue sky. Subic Bay was filled with all kinds of fish: dorado, moonfish, red snapper, giant grouper, and sea bass. The Marines and sailors liked to snorkel and scuba dive in the crystal clear water almost as much as they enjoyed sunning on the beach, drinking long neck bottles of San Miguel beer and showing off for their lady friends. We watched as a tall Marine spiked a volleyball over the net. "In your face," the jarhead yelled. Past the game, others swam and played in the clean blue salt water. 3 gray pelicans flew in formation above our heads, just low enough that we could hear the sound of the air moving over their wings. "What are you going to do?" Max asked. "I don't know. Why does this kind of shit always happen to me, Max?" I sat there digging my toes into the warm sand, watching the waves roll in and break on the beach, and thinking about Uncle Tony, my mom, school, and my messed up life in Subic. Sometimes I feel like I'm nothing. You know what I mean, Max? I can be standing right next to someone and they don't even notice I'm there. I'm always the one that has to get out of the way and do what they tell me. I'm sick of it. It makes my stomach hurt. Max had no answers, but tried to reassure me. "It's going to be okay, man." Max and I went to Catholic school where the nuns were very strict. Sister Deborah was from Iowa, and she drilled English into us until we were sick of it. Her breath always smelled like mint, and she had a big orange cat named Slinky that she brought along with her to school. She had even taught the cat how to crap into a toilet, if you can believe that. I guess she figured that if she could teach a cat to do that, she could teach us to speak English like the Americans. My mom and Sister Deborah could not have been more different, but for some reason they seemed to get along very well. I guess the one thing the two of them had in common was me, and together they decided that I was going to receive a good education, one way or another, in spite of Uncle Tony. "I pay a lot of money, so you go good school. You work hard, or I kick your ass, Danilo," my mom had told me. "Your father was smart, you smart too. You need be smart so you can take care of me when I old lady." She was joking. She wasn't joking either. I was her retirement plan. Sister Deborah would report to Mom if I was late or absent, so I never skipped school. I could remember things better than the other kids could, and was especially good with numbers, so school seemed pretty easy to me. "Danilo, God gave you a gift, and you must not waste it," Sister Deborah would yell at me when it looked as if I wasn't paying attention. She would then almost always give me something extra to read or to do. I drove the trike for Uncle Tony in the evenings. I looked up and down the beach as I stood up and wiped the sand off. "Let's go by the Blackbird Club and see if anyone has heard anything about Uncle Tony," I said to Max. "I don't know, man. Maybe we should just stay here and sleep on the beach. He's not going to mess with you here, Max," Max said. "You shouldn't be with me anyway. You stay here," I told him. "No, you stay here while I go ask around. They'll be looking for you, not me. It's better that I do it," Max argued. I knew he was right. "Okay, go ahead then. I'll stay here and look at the girls," I said weakly. I plopped back down and watched him jog down the beach until he crossed the street and headed in the direction of the Blackbird Club. A very popular spot, the Blackbird Club, where I had dropped the girl with the legs and her friend off the other night. Stood right past the bridge outside the front gate of the base. This meant it was one of the first places the guys would stop and spend their money. It is where Mom worked, as well as my sister. Rose, who was 2 years older than me, I used to work there too. I was still pretty young when the owner hired me to stand in front of the club, talk the servicemen into going inside. They called me a barker. "Hey guys, what ship you from?" I would ask. "You been here before? My name's Danny. Nice to meet you. You guys ever been in the Blackbird before?" Normally, only older guys were hired to do this, and they were paid a commission for every customer they delivered to the club. I was good at it, and one added perk that came along with the job was that I could keep an eye on my mom and sister at the same time. Mom was kind of in charge of the other women. She kept track of what shifts the girls worked, but she also sold drinks and spent time with the American servicemen. The bouncers got to know me and helped me keep Mom and Rose out of trouble on more than one occasion. I learned, though, from the job that I had a gift. I could convince people to do things. I was good at organizing things and making deals. The Blackbird Club was a big place. One big room crowded with tables and chairs with a bar along each side and a stage up front. There was a dressing room for the girls behind the stage. The only man allowed in there was the owner, and he spent more time in there than Mom liked. The girls at the club would take turns dancing on the stage. Then they would mingle with the customers, and a waitress would ask, "Would you like to buy the young lady a drink?" like in the old John Wayne movies. My mom and sister spent most of their time either in the Blackbird Club or with the men they met there. Mom taught my sister everything she knew. I hated her sometimes for that. "You be picky, very picky. You listen to me. Make sure they have money. Talk first. He no money, no honey. He no marry you if he think you bad girl." My sister Rose was gorgeous. Although she had dark hair like all the other Filipino women, she was taller and had more curves. She wore red lipstick on her very full lips, but no other makeup. Her father had been an American and also part Italian, Mom said. I was proud and ashamed of Rose all at the same time. My sister always had an American boyfriend. They didn't stick around for very long, though, because eventually they all shipped back home to the States. "Why have just one man when all he's going to do is leave, and then I have to go and find another one?" Rose would always say. Rose grew up watching and learning from my mom. The half-inch thick plywood that our walls were made of did not do much to stifle the sounds and voices of the men that my mother chose to bring home. Most of them would disappear before the sun poked through the cracks of east side of our house. We all knew that Rose would follow in Mom's footsteps. That's just the way it was. You could say it was the family business. People would often mistake Mom and Rose for sisters. Still, Mom was getting older, while Rose was getting prettier, and Mom's chances for finding a man who loved her enough to take her home to meet his mother were growing slimmer. I had enjoyed working at the Blackbird Club, so maybe that is why Uncle Tony had put a stop to it one day and ordered me to work for him, driving one of his trikes around Subic in the evenings, where he could control my destiny. "Sorry, Danilo, Big Tony says you're only allowed to work for him," the guy who ran the club had told me. I sat there in the warm sand thinking about the Blackbird Club, Rose, Mom, and Uncle Tony until I looked up and saw Max running back up the beach toward me. No one knows anything," Max happily reported as he plopped down in the sand next to me out of breath. "Well, maybe no news is good news," I joked, trying to act cool. "You go home now, Max. I think you better not hang around with me until we hear something." "That's bull, Danilo. We need to stick together." "No, go on home, Max. I'll catch up with you tomorrow." Max didn't think I was safe, but he knew better than to argue with me anymore. "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." "You going to stay here all night?" he asked. "Maybe," I replied. I sat there in the sand until Max was gone and the sun set over the horizon. I then zigzagged my way home, trying my best to be invisible. Rose was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked into the house. "Did Mom find him and talk to him?" I asked. "I haven't heard anything yet," Rose replied. "Danilo, he knows better. Mom would cut his balls off if he hurt you." I didn't say anything. "It's going to be okay," she said. I opened the door to the fridge, looked inside, and then shut it. Nothing looked good to me. "I'm going to bed. My stomach hurts again," I said. "I'll make you some tea and bring it in," Rose offered. She could be very sweet when she wanted to be. I drank the warm tea Rose made for me, crawled under my thin blanket, pulled it up under my chin, closed my eyes, and lay there, trying to stop my mind from thinking and my stomach from churning. I finally felt myself drifting off. Thump, thump! The entire side of our little house shook. I jumped up out of bed, felt my way in the dark along the wall, and stood in the farthest corner. I gripped my knife in my right hand and held my breath and waited. Thump! The neighbor's dog started barking. I need to hold the knife when I stab him so that my hand doesn't slide up the blade. That was one of the many little things that Uncle Tony had taught me. I bet he never dreamed that I might use it against him. I had never stabbed anyone before, had not felt the blade slide into the soft part of a human body. I had cut a boy once, though. The boy had been the son of one of the men that had worked for Uncle Tony. The boy was 16 at the time, and I was 13. He stuttered, couldn't read, and was big for his age. He was a peeker. He liked to look through windows at night and watch. He was creepy. He smelled bad, and I really didn't like him. But since his dad was Uncle Tony's right-hand man, I was stuck with him once in a while. Go sit with Raoul's son outside, Uncle Tony ordered. We perched in the alley on beer crates while we smoked a couple cheap Swisher sweet cigars. One of my mom's boyfriends had left them on the kitchen table earlier that morning. You want to see it? See what? I'll show you mine if you can show me yours. What? He winked at me as he rubbed his crotch. Hell no, I yelled as I backed away and opened the door to the room where Uncle Tony and his crew were still having their meeting. Uncle Tony looked up at me with a pissed-off expression on his face. He was used to people doing just what he had told them, and he really hated it when they didn't. What did I say? He scolded. I stood there. He looked at his men and then back again at me. I did not move. Give me a minute, he said, stood up from his chair, grabbed me around the back of my neck, and led me into the other room. His men laughed as his thumb and fingers dug into my skinny 13-year-old neck. He stopped and spun me around. What? I very quietly told him what had happened. And you did nothing? You fucking did nothing? You pussy, are you a queer? My face turned red. I couldn't help it. I looked down and started to cry. He slapped me so hard across my face, I saw stars, and then fell. You get your fucking ass back out there and handle it now, he yelled as he jerked me to my feet. I held my right hand up to my face and felt the wetness of my tears, the burning numbness and swelling of my cheek. I couldn't tell if the salt I tasted was from my blood or from my crying. Don't be a pussy, Uncle Tony gritted his teeth as he pushed me towards the door. Use your butterfly knife, he hissed. I turned and walked slowly outside as he watched from the door. I stopped for a second, looked over my shoulder. Do it, he mouthed. It felt as if he were pushing me forward with his will. The boy saw Uncle Tony. He looked at the knife in my hand, then backed away as I moved toward him. No, he tried to yell. I hated Uncle Tony at that moment. I hated myself. I felt sorry for the boy, but I kept moving forward. The boy should have turned and ran away sooner. Perhaps a smarter boy might have, but he didn't. I raised the knife high and slashed down as the stuttering boy retreated, cutting his t-shirt and drawing blood from a shallow cut across his back. The kid screamed, tripped and fell. Sobbing, my heart racing, I raised the knife again. Uncle Tony laughed as he grabbed my arm, holding the knife. Thump, thump. The noise came again. Thoughts raced through my mind. I need to aim for his neck or his stomach where I won't hit any bone. Maybe I should jump out the window and run. Thump! The dog began barking again. I slipped over to my bedroom window and quietly pulled the heavy brown curtains apart. Bam! Bam! Within inches from my face, a large fist slammed against the window. I dropped to the floor. "Rose! Rose! I know you have someone in there with you," a voice yelled outside my window. The loud voice sounded familiar. I relaxed the tight grip from around the handle of my knife after I realized that it was not Uncle Tony. "Rose! Rose!" the man yelled. "It's only Clint," I thought as I slid the knife back under my pillow and crawled back into bed, listening to all the commotion. "Shh! Be quiet," I heard Rose say from outside in the hallway. "I'll kick his ass," declared a different but familiar man's voice, also coming from the hallway close to her. It was Tim. Oh shit, this is not going to be good, I thought. I lay there and held my breath, waiting to see what would happen. Bam! The wall in the house shook. "You go. Rose not here. Go now or I call MPs," my mom screamed out the window at the drunken jarhead. I'd like to see her do that. We don't even have a phone, I thought. I held my breath while I waited to hear what would happen next. Bam! "Have a great life, Rose. See you never, you slut," Clint yelled. Though he was a physically fit, 6-foot-tall, Kansas-bred American naval officer, Clint knew better than to mess with my mom. He just turned around and left, and it was probably a good thing that he did too. Tall, skinny Tim, with his big ears and thick southern accent, was no match for Clint. I heard Mom scolding Rose before she shut the door to her room. She was not happy. Clint was a captain, an officer, and a boss. Mom wanted Rose to end up with an officer. Tim was just an E3, a lance corporal, a worker bee. His dad had died working in a coal mine back in Kentucky, so Tim had a twin sister and a little brother that he helped his mother support. He only made around $600 a month and sent more than half of that back to them each payday, so he never had much money left over. Another problem with Tim was that he liked to play poker. Once in a while he would show up totally broke. Mom would cuss him out and try to keep him out of the house. It would drive her crazy when Rose would then have to pay when Tim and she went out on a date. "You go back base. Rose not want you here," Mom would shout at Tim. "You no money, go away." Rose would eventually let him in, but Tim knew that he had no hold on her, that she would be going to the club the next night to work. She would line up on stage with the other girls so that the men would notice her. She would walk around the room asking them if they would like to dance or buy a drink, and if a man agreed, she would sit and spend time with him. The more money he spent, the longer she stayed. "You buy lady another drink?" The waitress would return over and over again with an expensive glass of soda that the customers thought was mixed with alcohol, but really was not. How such a small girl could hold her liquor so well remained a mystery that most of them never solved. Rose wasn't the most educated person, but was really smart. She could always kick my butt when we played chess, and even though she didn't go to school anymore, she liked to keep learning and spend lots of her spare time reading. Another thing she really loved was playing her guitar. One of Rose's boyfriends gave her his old guitar before he shipped home to the States. She fell in love with that thing, taking lessons every other day for over a year and practicing all the time. I would watch her smile and close her eyes as she played, and I could tell that the music helped her escape in her mind to somewhere far away from Subic. The American men who came into the Blackbird were chess pieces that she moved around on the game board. Rose was strong-willed, like my mother, and possessed the same power to control men and get what she wanted from them. I didn't like what she had to do to possess that control. Late one muggy night, a couple of weeks after the fight with Uncle Tony, Max and I were out in town, shuffling down one of the lesser-used side streets. We had started to let our guard down a little since Uncle Tony had not been heard from. "Who would you rather have sex with?" Max asked. A great-looking girl with only one boob, or a girl with only one leg? What? That's such a stupid question, even for you, Max. How nice is the one boob? I said. A long, ominous shadow suddenly appeared out in front of us, cast by a large figure positioned between me and the dim streetlight behind us. I jerked my head quickly to the left so that I could see what or who was moving so close behind us. Before I was able to turn all the way around, a very large hand reached out and grabbed me by the back of my neck. The hand held me with a firm grip, and I instantly thought about the little man Uncle Tony had strangled in the alley. Every muscle in my body went tight. I closed my eyes and I thought about how the little man had pissed his pants right before he died. No, God, please. I'm not ready to die yet, please. Hey, you little shit, how you doing? Said a somewhat familiar voice from behind me. The big hand let go. I slowly turned the rest of the way around as I rubbed the back of my sore neck with my right hand. Sergeant Stahle. A small dark bruise under his left eye still remained from the ambush. He swayed from side to side where he stood there as if he had been drinking, pretty heavily again. He smelled like whiskey. Let me buy you boys a soda, he slurred. We all walked across the street to the Satisfied Frog and sat down at a small worn table. Its top was carved up with people's initials and stupid shit that jarheads and sailors thought were funny. I looked down at Sergeant Stahle as he began to talk. I love Flip Pussy was scratched in big letters into the wood in front of me. I had months' worth of pay in my wallet that night. I owed that money to the owner of the bar and went to the Brown Fox to pay him, but he never showed. I got shit-faced waiting, Sergeant Stahle explained. How do you feel now? I asked. Those squid doctors fixed me up good, he said, as he pulled up his shirt and showed me the fresh pink reddish scar that ran up his side. A half dozen or more older scars from combat in Vietnam and other previous fights covered his torso. Sergeant Stahle swayed to his side and bumped the table, spilling my drink all over the floor. I thought about the scar the stuttering boy must still have on his back. It looks as if that wasn't your first knife fight, I commented. Nope, that wasn't my first, he said as he plopped back down in his chair. Sergeant Stahle didn't say another word. He leaned back and kind of half passed out. Sergeant Stahle, I said. Sergeant Stahle, I shook him. What? What do you want? You ready to go back to the base, I asked. No, I need a drink, he said as he almost slid off his chair. You sure, I asked. Maybe not. I gotta get up early, he said. They're giving me a whole new bunch of newbies tomorrow. Max and I helped him flag down a trike and told the driver to take him back to base. We followed behind in another trike to make sure he made it there safely. I crossed paths with Sergeant Stahle several times around town after that. I even introduced him to my mom and Rose one night after we had bumped into him out on the street. How could you possibly be Danny's mom? Did you have him when you were 5? He had joked. Of course, Mom liked the flattery and attention. After buttering up Mom, Sergeant Stahle turned to me and said, guys like us need to stick together. I'm here for you, little man. You stay in school and study hard. No drugs. Nice meeting you, ladies. I don't know why, but I kind of liked it when he talked to me like that. One night I was walking along with him in front of the Brown Fox Club, and a dark-haired, stocky jarhead walked up to us with a big smile on his face. He stuck out his right hand so that Sergeant Stahle could shake it. The sergeant reached out, took hold, and pulled the jarhead in close and gave him a big bear hug. Man, it's good to see you. You just get to Subic? Sergeant Stahle asked. A week ago. How you been? Good. Good. Danny, I want you to meet one of my good buddies. We went through boot camp together. This here is Lance. Lance, this is Danny. I shot expert on the rifle range because of him, Sergeant Stahle said. This country boy can shoot. Nice to meet you, Lance said, ignoring Sergeant Staley's praise. The three of us walked together for a while. I listened as the two of them caught up with each other. Where you been spending your time here in Subic? You find yourself a girl yet? Sergeant Stahle teased. We're mostly working out when I'm not in the shop fixing stuff, Lance said. Are you kidding me? Do you know where you are? This is Subic, baby, where all your dreams can come true. That settles it. Just leave it up to me, Sergeant Stahle said as he smiled, slapped Lance on the back, and led him into the Brown Fox Club. I didn't see the two of them until a couple of days later. Sergeant Stahle shook his head and confessed, Danny, Lance won't have anything to do with the girls I've been trying to set him up with. He told me he wants a nice girl. Stahle smiled. Danny boy, I have an idea. He's the kind of guy you want dating your sister, he explained. Lance is from Nebraska, a farm boy. Nice guy and all that shit. The guy owns cows, for Christ's sake. I think that if he met Rose somewhere other than the club, it would work. What do you mean it would work? I asked. They'd like each other, that's all. I looked Sergeant Stahle in the eye. It bugged me that he was trying to fix his buddy up with my sister, but after I thought about it for a few minutes, I realized that if she was going to date a guy anyway, it might as well be someone like this buddy, Lance from Nebraska. A few days later, Sergeant Stahle asked Lance to meet him at the bowling alley on the base. Lance was busy picking out a ball as Sergeant Stahle, Rose, and I walked up behind him. Sergeant Stahle began the introductions. Rose, this is Lance. Lance turned around with the heavy bowling ball in his right hand. Lance, this is Rose, Sergeant Stahle said. Lance is from Nebraska, I blurted out. I swear that I thought I could see fireworks going off in the reflection of his eyes as Rose reached out to shake his hand. Lance took a step forward without breaking eye contact with Rose and dropped his bowling ball onto his foot. Lance never lost his smile. Are you okay? Rose asked. Lance's face turned red as his smile grew even bigger. Lance said, how much longer before you ship back to the States? Rose asked. 2 months and 2 days, Lance replied. The two of them stood there talking, ignoring me and Sergeant Stahle for almost 20 minutes until Sergeant Stahle and I decided that we were just in the way and left. I think he's in love, Sergeant Stahle declared as we walked around the corner. Lance and Rose ended up liking each other a lot. A month went by and Lance had spent almost all his free time with Rose and our family. Lance treated me like a little brother, spending time with me, spearfishing, and letting me tag along when he and Rose would hang out on the base. Mom liked him too, especially when she found out that he owns lots of land back in the States. One afternoon, Rose's old boyfriend Tim showed up at the front door. I guess Rose had not told him that she had moved on. He had a present with a big red bow tied around it, tucked under his arm. Rose not here, Mom told Tim. She with new boyfriend. You go away now. Go back base. She not like you. Go. Tim looked over his shoulder and spotted me. Hey, Danny. How you doing? What's the deal with Rose? Tim asked me, trying to ignore my mother. It's true. I think you're probably just wasting your time, man. Then pointing to the package under his arm, I asked, what's that? I bought her a boombox, he said. It's a good one, too. I got it in the PX in Japan. That's great, I said, trying to be nice. You sure I'm wasting my time? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Sorry, man. Tell her I'm going home in 2 weeks, okay? She can call me at the barracks if she wants to. She has a number. Tell her to leave a message, okay? I'll tell her. Promise? I'll do it. Mom was growing impatient. You go now. she said to Tim as she tried to push him back and shut the door. I followed behind him. Just then Rose and Lance walked up the front of the house, hand in hand, as Tim turned around to leave. "Hi, Rose," Tim said. The four of us stood there for a minute, not knowing what to do. "Lance, this is Tim. Tim, this is Lance," I said as I looked over at Rose. Lance stuck out his hand and Tim shook it. Neither of them said anything. "Tim is heading home soon. He just came over to say goodbye," I explained. Tim looked at me and then over at Rose. He stepped around Lance and then walked away slowly, with his head hung low and his boombox still under his arm. He shipped back to the States 2 weeks later, just like he had said. The picture of Tim that had been taped to Rose's bathroom mirror ended up being replaced by one of Lance in his dress blues. The romance between Lance and Rose continued to blossom. You could see that Lance loved her. He bought her gifts and talked about marrying her and moving us all back to Nebraska. The way he looked at Rose and talked to her was different than any other man had ever treated her before. His face would light up whenever she was around. I was so happy for her. Lance served as a corporal in the Marines. 5'10" and stocky but not fat. He was strong, with a square jaw and a thick neck. Lance was a good-looking man except for one thing. He had a long, jagged, ugly scar on his right side of his face that reached from the bottom of his ear all the way to the corner of his mouth. Sergeant Stahle told me later that Lance had been in a farming accident when he was a little boy. Lance almost always wore short-sleeved polo shirts when he was not in uniform, with his thick, muscular arms stretching the cotton fabric. An old $20 gold piece hung from a leather string around his neck next to his dog tags. "Don't ever lose this, Lance. My daddy gave it to me a long time ago," his grandfather had told him. "Keep it safe, and when you look at it, remember me and your grandma. Remember that you're a Hoffman and that we're proud of you." Lance did not talk much, but when he did, he spoke quietly, and it was almost always worth listening to. He had dark brown hair and blue eyes. His great-grandfather had moved to the U.S. from Germany, and his mother was Czech, but he joked that he was a Nebraskan. Lance worked during the graveyard shift on the base and as an avionics technician. He would work from midnight to 7 in the morning, then come into town to spend time with my sister. He was very good at fixing things, and Mom took full advantage of that by giving him little jobs to do whenever he came over to our house. Our roof always leaked, so of course Lance and I were the ones ordered to climb up on top and fix it. Lance was a hard worker and wanted to get the job done fast so that he could spend time with Rose before heading back to the base to work again. Roofing was a hot, humid, miserable job. Lance snapped one order after another at me until I had just about had it. I liked Lance, but really didn't give a shit if the roof leaked or not. I was just sick of taking orders. "Danny, climb down, hand me up that last big sheet of tin leaning against the side of the house." I made my way grudgingly down the rickety ladder, and as I stepped onto solid ground again, something caught my eye. I reached down and picked it up. It turned out to be Lance's gold piece that his father had given him. I held it in the palm of my hand, looking up the ladder. I opened my mouth to tell Lance, but he was busy and could not see me. "Fool, put it in your pocket," I could hear Uncle Tony's voice in my head. I looked back up the ladder again. I closed my hand tightly around the old gold coin. "This is worth more than everything that Mom, Rose, and I owned combined. He's going home soon to Nebraska. We'll probably never see him again anyway," I thought. "I'm going to get a drink. Do you want anything?" I yelled back at Lance as I slipped the shiny coin into my pocket and ducked through the door into the house. I went to my room and quickly hid it. Then I sat on my bed and thought about what I had just done. I need to give it back. But I didn't. And little did I know then that it would turn out to be one of the worst decisions of my life. Lance didn't notice that the coin was missing from around his neck until he went to take a shower later. at the base before he went to work. Without permission from his sergeant, he left the base and came back to our house looking around for his family heirloom. "Did any of you see it?" he asked. I wanted to tell him that I had found the coin and give it back to him, but the die was cast and it was too late to change it. I did my best not to make eye contact with him then. "God dang it! My dad told me that I should leave it with him for safekeeping. Why didn't I listen? Shit, shit, shit," he cussed as he moved around the room looking for the lost coin. "We'll find it," Rose said, moving stuff around and helping Lance search. "Are you sure you had it when you were here?" she asked. "Yeah, of course I did. I always have it." "Let's backtrack again. We'll work our way to the barracks and then come all the way back here if we have to," she said. "We'll never find it," Lance whined. "Don't give up yet," Rose assured him. She took me aside. "Danilo, you sure you haven't seen it?" "No, I haven't. I swear." It was the first and only time I'd ever lied to Rose. I kept the coin. As time passed, the more I began to like Lance and the more the coin weighed on my mind. I wanted to return it, but was scared that he and Rose would then realize I had stolen it. I took it from its hiding place one night and walked out into the ocean, holding it high above me. I wound up to pitch it out into the sea, but just couldn't do it. I took the coin home again and stuck it back in its hiding place and tried to forget about it. Chapter 3.